Economy is to the right, sweetheart. This section isn't for people like you. The words hit the humid air of Miami International Airport like a slap across the face. Rebecca Torres, lead flight attendant for Atlantic Airways, stood in the doorway of the Boeing 777-300ER with her arms crossed, blocking the path like a human gate. Her voice carried that practiced authority flight crews use when they've already decided you're the problem. At 11:15 p.m. on a sticky Thursday night, Flight 847 bound for London Heathrow was supposed to be routine. A red-eye filled with business travelers, wealthy retirees, and the occasional student flying on daddy's dime. But the young black woman standing in the jet bridge doorway, clutching a boarding pass and wearing a faded Columbia University hoodie, had just shattered Rebecca's assumptions about who belonged in first class. Before we dive into what became the most viral aviation meltdown in social media history, let me ask you something. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere you paid to be? If this story moves you, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about a seat dispute. This is what happens when quiet dignity goes to war with loud prejudice. And spoiler alert, dignity wins in the most spectacular way imaginable. The girl's name was Zara Blackwood, though nobody on Flight 847 would learn that until it was far too late. At 22 years old, she looked like any other broke college student trying to stretch her budget. Beat-up Converse sneakers, leggings with a small hole near the left knee, and an oversized hoodie that had seen better days. Her canvas messenger bag was frayed at the edges, held together with duct tape and determination. Everything about her screamed standby passenger hoping for an upgrade. Everything except the boarding pass in her hand that clearly displayed Blackwood Zara, Seat 1A, First Class. Zara didn't stop walking when Rebecca made her declaration. She held up her phone screen without breaking stride, displaying the digital boarding pass with its bold QR code and gate information. Seat 1A, she said simply, her voice carrying a strange calmness for someone being racially profiled at 35,000 feet. Rebecca blinked, her mouth slightly open like a fish gasping for air. She snatched Zara's phone and examined the screen with the intensity of a detective studying evidence. The boarding pass was legitimate. Premium first-class Seat 1A window seat full fare. No upgrades, no companion passes, no employee benefits. Someone had paid $4,800 for this seat, and that someone was standing in front of her in clothes that probably cost less than the airport parking fee. There must be some mistake, Rebecca muttered more to herself than to Zara. She tapped the screen, perhaps hoping the information would change. It didn't. Let me check our manifest. Let me. Zara adjusted the strap of her messenger bag and waited patiently while Rebecca fumbled with her tablet. Around them, other passengers were boarding their expensive luggage, rolling smoothly across the jet bridge floor. They barely glanced at the holdup except to check their own phones and calculate whether this delay would affect their connections. The system shows you in one. Rebecca admitted reluctantly, but her tone suggested this was somehow Zara's fault. But there might be a passenger classification error. Sometimes the computer assigns seats inappropriately when there's a booking irregularity. What kind of irregularity? Zara asked, stepping closer. She was taller than Rebecca had initially realized, and there was something in her dark eyes that suggested this wasn't her first time dealing with people who questioned her right to exist in premium spaces. Rebecca's discomfort was visible. She shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the other passengers filing past them, then back at Zara's outfit. Well, sometimes when students book through third-party discount sites, they end up in seats they didn't actually pay for. It creates confusion for everyone involved. I'm not a student, Zara said quietly. I'm a paying passenger with a confirmed reservation. May I please board my flight now? The pause that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. 7 seconds during which Rebecca Torres made a choice that would end her career, destroy an airline's reputation, and turn Zara Blackwood into a symbol of quiet resistance that would be studied in business schools for decades to come. I'm going to need to see additional identification, Rebecca announced, her voice gaining false confidence. And I'll need to verify your payment method. Sometimes fraudulent bookings don't show up until after passengers board. Other passengers had started to notice the delay. A man in an expensive suit cleared his throat impatiently. A woman with multiple shopping bags from duty-free shops was checking her Rolex. The boarding process was backing up, and Rebecca knew she needed to resolve this quickly. But instead of following standard procedure, which would have been to allow Zara to board and address any concerns once the plane was airborne, she chose escalation. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while I contact our gate supervisor. Rebecca continued gesturing toward a holding area near the jet bridge windows. This won't take long, but we need to ensure all passengers are properly ticketed before departure. Zara looked at the designated waiting area, then back at Rebecca. Something shifted in her expression. Not anger, not frustration, but a kind of resigned understanding that told her exactly what was happening here. She'd seen this movie before. No, Zara said simply. The word fell into the space between them like a stone, dropping into still water. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me, I said no. I have a valid ticket. I'm boarding my flight. You can verify whatever you need to verify once I'm in my seat. Zara's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the silk now. I'm not standing in a corner while you decide whether I look wealthy enough to deserve the seat I paid for. Rebecca's face flushed red. Around them, the boarding process had essentially stopped as other passengers began to listen to what was clearly becoming a confrontation. Someone in the back of the line was already reaching for their phone. Miss, you are being uncooperative with crew instructions, which is a federal offense, Rebecca said, her voice rising. I am authorized to deny boarding to any passenger who poses a security or safety risk to the flight. What security risk do I pose? Zara asked. Standing here with a valid boarding pass in clothes you don't approve of. That was the moment Marcus and Victoria Hoffman decided to make their entrance. Marcus Hoffman was 58 years old and worth approximately $340 million, though he'd tell you it was closer to $400 million if you included his art collection and the yacht he kept in Monaco. He was the kind of man who wore his wealth like armor, from his perfectly tailored navy suit to his Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent. His wife Victoria followed close behind, a vision in beige cashmere and surgical enhancement, clutching a Hermes bag that could have funded a small college education. They were Atlantic Airways' most valued customers, flying this route monthly for the past 5 years. The Hoffmans always booked seats 1A and 1B, always requested Dom Perignon before takeoff, and always expected the crew to remember their preferences. What they didn't expect was to find their usual seats occupied by someone who looked like she'd raided a thrift store. Marcus stopped short when he saw Zara standing in the boarding area. His eyes moved from her sneakers to her hoodie to her canvas bag, and his expression shifted from mild surprise to obvious displeasure. This was his plane, his route, his first-class cabin, and someone was clearly in the wrong place. Rebecca Marcus said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man accustomed to having his problem solved immediately. What's the delay here, Mr. Hoffman? Rebecca's entire demeanor changed instantly. Her shoulders straightened, her smile returned, and her voice took on the warm, accommodating tone she reserved for Platinum Elite members. So sorry for the holdup. We're just resolving a seating issue. You and Mrs. Hoffman can board immediately. Marcus looked at Zara again, then at his boarding pass, then back at Zara. The math didn't add up in his privileged worldview. She's in our seat, he announced, as if this settled the matter entirely. Victoria stepped forward, already pulling out her phone to record what she was certain would be an entertaining removal of an obvious gate crasher. Honey, call the supervisor. This is ridiculous. How did she even get a boarding pass for first class? There seems to be some confusion about the seating assignments, Rebecca explained, her voice apologetic but only toward the Hoffmans. I'm working to resolve it now. Zara watched this exchange with growing understanding. She understood exactly what was happening here, exactly what assumptions were being made, and exactly how this was going to end if she didn't take control of the situation. She reached into her messenger bag and pulled out her phone. Not to take pictures or make calls, but to send a single text message to a contact labeled Legal Emergency. The message was short. Flight 847, Gate D12, discrimination in progress. Document everything. Then she looked up at Marcus Hoffman, who was growing redder by the second, and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his considerably shortened career. "Sir, this is my seat. I have the boarding pass to prove it. Take your assigned seat, or take it up with the airline." "But you're not taking mine." Marcus Hoffman stared at her like she'd just spoken in ancient Greek. In his world, people like Zara didn't speak to people like him that way. They apologized, they moved, they disappeared. They certainly didn't stand their ground in first class wearing clothes from Target. "Listen here, young lady," Marcus said, stepping closer to loom over her. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've been flying this route longer than you've been alive. This is Seat 1A. These are my seats. And you need to move, now." Victoria had started recording, holding her phone at the perfect angle to capture what she was certain would be a viral video of an entitled millennial getting ejected from first class. She was absolutely right about the viral part. She was just wrong about who would be getting ejected. Zara looked directly into Victoria's camera lens and spoke clearly. "My name is Zara Blackwood. I am a paying passenger with a confirmed reservation for Seat 1A on Atlantic Airways Flight 847. I am being denied boarding based on the color of my skin and the clothes I'm wearing. The time is 11:18 p.m. Thursday, September 14th. Please make sure you get the tail number in your video. It's N847AA. The tail number would become important later, much more important than anyone standing in that jet bridge could possibly imagine." Rebecca Torres made her final, fatal decision. Instead of de-escalating, instead of checking the Hoffman's boarding passes, instead of following the basic protocols that might have saved her career, she chose to side with wealth and status over facts and fairness. "I'm calling security," Rebecca announced loudly enough for everyone in the boarding area to hear. "This passenger is refusing to cooperate with crew instructions and causing a disturbance." Marcus smiled the satisfied smile of a man who'd just won a game he didn't even know he was playing. Victoria kept recording, already imagining the likes and shares her video would receive. Other passengers continued to board around them, most looking uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. But as Rebecca reached for her radio to call airport security, none of them had any idea that Zara's earlier text message had just reached someone with the power to ground their plane, end their careers, and turn their assumptions about power and privilege upside down forever. The last thing Rebecca Torres said before her world exploded was, "Security to Gate D12, immediate passenger removal required." She had no idea she was about to become the most famous flight attendant in aviation history for all the wrong reasons. While security was being summoned to Gate D12, the real story of who Zara Blackwood actually was remained locked away in government databases, Forbes estimates and Pentagon clearance files that would have made Marcus Hoffman's pharmaceutical fortune look like pocket change. Zara Blackwood wasn't just any 22-year-old college dropout wandering around airports in thrift store clothes. She was the founder and CEO of Blackwood Aerospace Engineering, a defense contracting company that had gone from her MIT dorm room to an $8.2 billion valuation in just 3 years. More importantly, for everyone currently standing in that jet bridge, she was also the majority owner of Blackwood Aviation, leasing the company that provided Atlantic Airways with 40% of their international fleet, including the Boeing 777-300ER. They were all arguing about boarding. But tonight, Zara wasn't traveling as a CEO or defense contractor. She was traveling as an undercover investigator, and Flight 847 was her target. For the past month, Zara's legal team had been receiving anonymous complaints about Atlantic Airways Flight 847's crew. Not just random passenger service complaints, but a pattern of discrimination so clear and consistent that it demanded investigation. The complaints painted a picture of a route where minority passengers were routinely questioned, downgraded, or removed based on subjective security concerns that seemed to correlate perfectly with race and income. The pattern was always the same. Black or Hispanic passengers with legitimate first-class tickets would board the aircraft only to be told their seats were needed for operational requirements, or their bookings had irregularities that required investigation. Meanwhile, white passengers were welcomed aboard without question, even when their behavior was far more disruptive than the passengers being removed. Zara had already tested this theory twice on other Atlantic Airways routes, both times in disguise as a regular passenger. Both times, the discrimination was so blatant that she'd been able to force policy changes and crew terminations with nothing more than recorded evidence and a few well-placed phone calls to the FAA. Tonight was supposed to be the final test. One more documented incident would give her enough evidence to push for a federal investigation that would reshape how airlines handled passenger disputes. She just hadn't expected the discrimination to be quite so aggressive, quite so public, or quite so stupid. The irony wasn't lost on her. Marcus Hoffman was demanding she vacate a seat on a plane that she technically owned while Rebecca Torres was calling security to remove the person who could end her career with a single phone call. If the situation weren't so infuriating, it would have been almost funny. Zara's phone buzzed with a response to her earlier text. Legal team activated. Director Martinez en route to airport. Document everything. Stay calm. This ends tonight. Director Sarah Martinez wasn't just any legal contact. She was the FAA Regional Administrator for the Southeast, the person responsible for oversight of all commercial aviation in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. She was also someone who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence to justify a full investigation into Atlantic Airways' passenger removal practices. Martinez had been at Miami International for an unrelated conference when Zara's text arrived. Now she was racing through the terminal with a team of federal investigators heading toward a gate where a billionaire defense contractor was being treated like a criminal for the crime of flying while black. While Zara waited for backup to arrive, she decided to learn a bit more about the people who'd just declared war on her dignity. Marcus Hoffman was exactly the kind of passenger airlines loved and Zara despised. Rich enough to fly first class monthly, entitled enough to believe his frequent flyer status trumped basic human decency, and just connected enough to make crew members believe that accommodating his demands was more important than following actual policies. As CEO of Hoffman Pharmaceuticals, Marcus had built his fortune by acquiring smaller drug companies, firing their research staff, and raising prices on life-saving medications. His business model was simple. Find drugs that sick people couldn't live without, buy the companies that made them, and charge whatever the market would bear. It was legal, profitable, and absolutely ruthless. Victoria Hoffman was a different kind of predator. A former beauty queen who'd married into money she'd spent the past decade building a social media following based on luxury travel designer shopping and carefully curated lifestyle content that made ordinary people feel inadequate about their ordinary lives. She had 150,000 Instagram followers who lived vicariously through her first-class flights, 5-star hotels, and casual cruelty toward service workers. Together, the Hoffmans represented everything wrong with the current state of air travel passengers who believed money could buy them the right to abuse other human beings, supported by airline crews who were more afraid of offending valued customers than protecting basic dignity. Rebecca Torres was a more complex case. A 34-year-old single mother from Hialeah, she'd been working for Atlantic Airways for 8 years, slowly climbing from economy cabin to international first-class routes. She wasn't evil, just exhausted, overworked, and trained by experience to avoid any conflict that might threaten her job security. In Rebecca's world, passengers like the Hoffmans paid her salary. They wrote complaint letters that could end careers. They demanded specific crew members be fired for minor inconveniences, and they had the status and connections to make those demands stick. Meanwhile, passengers like Zara were just problems to be managed, moved, or removed before they could disrupt the delicate ecosystem of entitled wealth that kept international flights profitable. Rebecca had seen dozens of young passengers try to sneak into first class over the years. Students with fake boarding passes, kids using their parents' frequent flyer accounts, people who'd booked economy and hoped to charm their way into an upgrade. In her experience, anyone under 30 who didn't look like they belonged in first class probably didn't belong in first class. She just had no way of knowing that the person she was profiling as a potential gatecrasher was actually the person who owned the gate. The plane and enough of the airline's fleet to shut down their international operations with a phone call. Captain David Mitchell was in the cockpit running through pre-flight checks when he heard about the disturbance in the boarding area. At 48 years old, Mitchell was a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation who'd flown everything from regional jets to intercontinental wide-bodies. He'd also learned that the fastest way to maintain an on-time departure was to support his cabin crew in whatever decisions they made about passenger management. In Mitchell's experience, disputes about seating were usually resolved in one of two ways. Either the passenger accepted a different seat, or they were removed from the aircraft. He didn't particularly care which option happened as long as it happened quickly and didn't delay his pushback time. Mitchell had flown the Hoffmans before. They were demanding passengers, but predictable ones, and they never caused delays once they were settled in their seats. If Rebecca Torres thought removing another passenger was necessary to keep the Hoffmans happy, Mitchell was prepared to support that decision without asking too many questions. He had no idea that his willingness to look the other way was about to cost him a career that had taken 2 decades to build. James Rodriguez was watching the entire confrontation unfold from the galley area where he was loading catering supplies for the transatlantic flight. As a junior flight attendant, James had learned to stay quiet during passenger disputes, especially when they involved senior crew members and high-status passengers. But James could see exactly what was happening here, and it made his stomach turn. He'd grown up in Miami's working-class Hispanic community, and he knew discrimination when he saw it. Zara Blackwood was being removed from her paid seat for one reason, and one reason only: she didn't look like the Hoffmans' idea of who belonged in first class. James wanted to speak up. He wanted to check the Hoffmans' boarding passes, verify Zara's ticket, and point out that the entire situation was based on assumptions rather than facts. But he also wanted to keep his job, and junior flight attendants who contradicted senior crew members in front of valued passengers usually found themselves looking for new careers. So James stayed quiet and loaded champagne flutes, hating himself a little more with each passing minute. Amanda Wright was a travel blogger with 2.3 million followers across various social platforms, and she had a nose for content that would generate engagement. From her seat in 2B, she'd watched the entire confrontation develop with growing excitement. This was exactly the kind of authentic dramatic content that her audience craved. Amanda had built her following by documenting luxury travel experiences, but she'd discovered that her most viral content always involved conflict, controversy, or social justice themes. A video of obvious discrimination happening in real time would be worth millions of views and thousands of new subscribers. She just needed to be careful about how she positioned herself in the narrative. Amanda was a white woman with enough money to fly first class regularly, which meant she needed to be seen as an ally rather than a bystander if she wanted to maintain credibility with her socially conscious audience. Amanda started recording on multiple devices, making sure to capture audio clearly while keeping her cameras discreet. She'd edit everything together later into a compelling story arc that would dominate social media for days. Kevin Park was in seat 3, close enough to overhear every word of the dispute, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability about getting involved. As an investment banker for Goldman Sachs, Kevin understood power dynamics better than most people, and he could tell this situation was about to explode in ways that nobody currently involved seemed to anticipate. Kevin had actually heard of Zara Blackwood, though he didn't immediately recognize her in casual clothes. Blackwood Aerospace had been rumored as a potential IPO candidate for the past year, and Kevin's firm had been positioning themselves to lead the offering. He knew enough about her company's government contracts and revenue projections to understand that the young woman being harassed by airline staff was worth more money than everyone else in first class combined. He also knew enough about social media to recognize that this confrontation was about to become a viral disaster for everyone involved except Zara. The smart move would be to document everything, stay neutral, and position himself as a voice of reason in whatever media coverage followed. Kevin started live tweeting the incident with the hashtag #Flight847. Not because he particularly cared about justice, but because he recognized a trend in its early stages and wanted to ride the wave. As security officers entered the jet bridge, none of these people understood that they were about to become characters in a story that would reshape their industry, destroy several careers, and turn Zara Blackwood into a symbol of quiet resistance that would inspire millions of people around the world. They just thought they were dealing with a difficult passenger who didn't know her place. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The two airport security officers who responded to Rebecca's call were cut from the standard TSA cloth, tired, underpaid, and trained to view every passenger dispute as a potential security threat. Officer Michael Chen had been working airport security for 6 years and had seen every possible variation of entitled passengers making scenes about seating upgrades and perceived slights. Officer Lisa Santos was newer to the job, but had quickly learned that the fastest way to resolve boarding disputes was to remove whoever seemed most likely to cause ongoing problems. Neither officer asked questions when they arrived at gate D12. Rebecca Torres met them at the jet bridge entrance and pointed directly at Zara. "That passenger is refusing to follow crew instructions," Rebecca announced with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned by authority figures. "She's claiming a seat that belongs to our valued elite members, and she's being disruptive to the boarding process." Officer Chen looked at Zara, took in her casual clothes and youthful appearance, then looked at Marcus and Victoria Hoffman with their obvious wealth and status markers. The math seemed simple enough. Ma'am Chen addressed Zara with the weary tone security officers reserved for people they'd already decided were problems. "I need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Zara didn't move. She held up her boarding pass again, speaking clearly so everyone within earshot could hear her. "Officer Chen." She read his name tag deliberately. "I am a ticketed passenger with a confirmed reservation for Seat 1. A. I have not violated any airline policies or federal regulations. I am being removed because these passengers—" She gestured toward the Hoffmans. "Don't believe someone who looks like me belongs in first class." Marcus Hoffman stepped forward, his face red with indignation. "That's ridiculous. This has nothing to do with how you look. This has to do with you being in the wrong seat. Then show me your boarding pass," Zara replied calmly. The challenge hung in the air like a live wire. Marcus hesitated for the first time since the confrontation began. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, fumbling slightly as he accessed his Airline app. Victoria, still recording everything, sensed her husband's hesitation and jumped in. "We don't need to prove anything to you. We've been flying this route for years. The crew knows us. You're obviously some kind of scammer." But Zara kept her eyes on Marcus, waiting patiently as he pulled up his boarding pass on his phone screen. When he finally showed it to Officer Chen, the information was damning Marcus Hoffman. Seat 1C aisle. Not the window seat he'd been demanding. Not Seat 1A where Zara was legally assigned. The aisle seat directly across from it. Officer Chen studied the screen, then looked at Zara's boarding pass again. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Zara belonged in 1A. Marcus belonged in 1C. The entire confrontation was based on Marcus's assumption that his frequent flyer status entitled him to whatever seat he preferred, regardless of what he'd actually booked. Sir Chen addressed Marcus for the first time. "Your boarding pass shows seat 1C, not 1A." Marcus's face went from red to purple. That's a mistake. I always sit by the window. Rebecca knows I always sit by the window. The system must have changed my seat assignment. Rebecca Torres found herself caught between supporting her valued customer and contradicting obvious documentary evidence. She chose unwisely. Sometimes the system has glitches, Rebecca said, her voice less confident than before. Mr. Hoffman has a seating preference that we usually accommodate. I'm sure we can work something out. Work something out? Zara's voice carried a dangerous edge now. You want me to give up my paid seat because he prefers a different seat than the one he booked Victoria Hoffman, sensing the narrative slipping away from them, decided to escalate. You know what? You're being deliberately difficult. Normal people would just switch seats when asked nicely, but you're trying to make this some kind of racial thing when it's really about courtesy and class. The word class landed like a physical blow. Everyone in earshot understood exactly what Victoria meant, and it had nothing to do with airplane seating arrangements. Amanda Wright, the travel blogger in seat 2B, felt her jaw drop. She'd been recording discreetly, but Victoria's comment was so blatantly discriminatory that Amanda couldn't maintain her neutral observer status any longer. "Excuse me, Amanda," called out, standing up with her phone visible. "I'm recording this entire conversation for my travel blog. Mrs. Hoffman, did you just suggest that this passenger lacks class because she won't give up her paid seat to accommodate your husband's seating preference?" Victoria spun around, realizing for the first time that other passengers were actively documenting the confrontation. That's not what I meant. You're taking it out of context." "What context?" Amanda pressed, her camera still rolling. "A black woman with a valid first-class ticket is being asked to move so a white man can have her seat, and you're suggesting she lacks class for refusing. What context makes that acceptable?" Kevin Park, the investment banker in 3A, had been live tweeting the entire incident. His thread was already gaining traction. Thread. Watching obvious discrimination on Atlantic Air Flight 847. White passenger demanding black passenger's seat despite having different boarding pass. Crew supporting white passenger. This is insane. Hashtag Flight 847. Discrimination. The hashtag started trending within minutes as Kevin's followers began retweeting and adding their own commentary. Other passengers were now pulling out phones, turning what had been a relatively contained dispute into a viral social media event happening in real time. Marcus Hoffman, realizing that the situation was spiraling beyond his control, decided to take direct action. He stepped closer to Zara, using his height and physical presence to intimidate her. "Listen, sweetheart." Marcus said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone, but came across as condescending and threatening. "I don't think you understand how this works. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've spent over $200,000 with this airline in the past 5 years. You look like a college student flying on financial aid or her parents' money. This is a business-class environment where serious people do serious work. You'll be much more comfortable in economy where you can relate to people more like yourself." The statement was so openly racist and classist that even Rebecca Torres flinched. Officer Santos, who had remained quiet until now, shifted uncomfortably. She'd been trained to de-escalate conflicts, not enable wealthy passengers to abuse other travelers. But Marcus wasn't done. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick money clip filled with $100 bills. With theatrical flair, he peeled off 8 bills and held them out toward Zara. "Here's $800, Marcus announced loudly enough for the entire boarding area to hear. "Take this move to economy where you belong and everyone wins. You get paid for the inconvenience, I get my seat, and we don't delay the flight any further." The gesture was so arrogant, so insulting, and so publicly humiliating that several passengers gasped audibly. Amanda Wright zoomed in on the money, making sure her camera captured every bill. Kevin Park's fingers flew across his phone keyboard as he live-tweeted the bribery attempt. Zara stared at the money for a long moment. Then she looked up at Marcus with an expression that made him take an involuntary step backward. "You think $800 is enough to buy my dignity?" Zara asked, her voice soft, but carrying clearly through the suddenly silent boarding area. "You think because I'm young and black and not wearing designer clothes, I can be purchased like a piece of luggage?" She took the bills from his hand, gently, almost reverently. Marcus smiled, thinking he'd won. Then Zara tore the money in half with one sharp motion and let the pieces flutter to the ground between them. "Keep your money, Mr. Hoffman," Zara said, meeting his shocked stare with steady eyes. "I'll keep my seat and my self-respect." The destruction of federal currency was technically a crime, but nobody in that jet bridge was thinking about legalities. They were thinking about the viral video they'd just witnessed, the social media storm that was building, and the fact that a 22-year-old in a hoodie had just made a multimillionaire look like a fool on camera. Marcus's face went through several color changes as he processed what had just happened. The money he'd been so casually offering was scattered on the floor like confetti. Other passengers were openly filming now, their phones pointed at him as he struggled to maintain his composure. You destroyed federal currency," Marcus sputtered, pointing at the torn bills. "That's a federal crime, officer. Arrest her." But Officer Chen was looking at the torn money with a different perspective. He'd seen enough entitled rich passengers try to throw money at problems to recognize toxic behavior when he saw it. Marcus Hoffman had just offered a bribe to coerce another passenger into giving up her seat, and when that failed, he was trying to have her arrested for refusing his illegal offer. Sir Chen addressed Marcus offering money to influence seating arrangements could be considered harassment or coercion. "I suggest you take your assigned seat and allow this passenger to take hers." Rebecca Torres watched her authority evaporating in real time. The security officers weren't supporting her decision. The passengers were openly documenting what appeared to be discrimination, and social media was already exploding with negative coverage of her airline. She made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This passenger has been disruptive and uncooperative," Rebecca announced to the security officers. "She's delayed boarding, caused a scene, and destroyed property. I'm requesting her removal from the aircraft under federal aviation regulations regarding passenger compliance." Officer Santos spoke up for the first time. "Ma'am, from what I've observed, this passenger has been cooperative and reasonable. She has a valid boarding pass for the seat in question. The other passenger has a boarding pass for a different seat, but is demanding hers. I'm not seeing grounds for removal." Victoria Hoffman, realizing that the narrative was completely escaping their control, played her final card. She turned to face the cameras that were now openly recording and spoke directly to them. "This is exactly what's wrong with society today," Victoria declared, her voice rising to ensure maximum coverage. "Hard-working people who support businesses and create jobs are being harassed by entitled young people who think everything should be handed to them. This girl probably got her ticket through some diversity program or affirmative action scheme, and now she thinks she can disrespect customers who actually pay full price." The statement was so blatantly racist and so obviously false, given that Zara had clearly paid full fare for her seat, that even Marcus looked uncomfortable. But Victoria was live-streaming to her Instagram followers now, and she was committed to her narrative of being victimized by reverse discrimination. Zara listened to the entire rant with growing amazement. She'd expected bias and discrimination, but she hadn't expected it to be quite so stupid or quite so public. These people were destroying themselves on camera, creating evidence that would follow them for the rest of their lives. James Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant, who'd been watching from the galley, finally found his courage. He approached Rebecca with the passenger manifest in his hands. Rebecca James said quietly, I checked the system. The passenger in 1A paid $4,847 for that seat 3 weeks ago. She's not an upgrade, she's not using points, and she's not on any kind of assistance program. She paid cash for full fare first class. The information hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Everything she'd assumed about Zara was wrong. This wasn't a student trying to sneak into first class or someone using family connections to access premium seating. This was a paying customer who had every right to be exactly where she was. But instead of apologizing, instead of de-escalating, instead of following the basic customer service protocols she'd been trained on, Rebecca doubled down. "I don't care what the system says," Rebecca snapped at James. "These passengers," she gestured toward the Hoffmans, "are valued elite members. We accommodate elite members. That's how this business works." The statement was so obviously contrary to airline policy and federal regulation that Officer Chen finally stepped in to end the escalating confrontation. Ma'am Chen addressed Rebecca directly. "You cannot remove a passenger with a valid ticket to accommodate another passenger's seating preference. That's not how federal aviation regulations work. I suggest you allow both passengers to board and take their assigned seats." Rebecca Torres looked around the jet bridge and realized that every single person present was now against her. The security officers weren't supporting her decision. The passengers were documenting her bias. Her own junior crew member had contradicted her. And social media was exploding with negative coverage that would reach her supervisors within minutes. She made the decision that would end her career and change the airline industry forever. "I'm calling the captain," Rebecca announced. "This passenger is creating a security situation that requires crew intervention." She turned toward the aircraft door, presumably to summon Captain Mitchell from the cockpit. As she did, she failed to notice that Zara had taken out her phone and sent a second text message. This one was shorter than the first. Escalation confirmed. "They're calling the captain. Activate full response." 30 miles away, Director Sarah Martinez was already in her government vehicle racing toward Miami International Airport with a team of federal investigators. Zara's second message told her that the discrimination was following the exact pattern they'd been waiting to document. Tonight, Atlantic Airways Flight 847 wasn't just going to be delayed. Tonight, it was going to be grounded indefinitely. While Rebecca Torres was marching toward the cockpit to summon Captain Mitchell, the story of Flight 847 was exploding across social media platforms with the velocity and destructive power of a digital tsunami. What had started as a localized dispute in a jet bridge was now trending worldwide, turning passengers into accidental journalists and transforming a routine flight delay into a global conversation about racism, privilege, and corporate accountability. Amanda Wright had switched from discreet recording to full content creation mode. As a travel blogger with 2.3 million followers, she understood viral content when she saw it, and she was watching the most compelling story of discrimination and resistance she'd ever witnessed unfold in real time. Her initial TikTok video, posted just minutes after Marcus Hoffman had offered Zara money, already had 847,000 views and was climbing exponentially. Urgent. Watching obvious racism happen live on Atlantic Airways flight. Amanda had captioned the video. White passenger offering black woman cash to give up her paid first-class seat. Crew supporting the discrimination. This is happening right now. Hashtag Flight 847 discrimination. Hashtag Atlantic Airways. Hashtag travel while black. The comments section was on fire. Within minutes, the video had generated thousands of responses ranging from outrage at the obvious discrimination to demands for accountability from both the airline and the Hoffman family. People were already doing detective work, trying to identify the passengers involved and calling for boycotts of Atlantic Airways. But Amanda's TikTok was just the beginning. Kevin Park's Twitter thread had exploded beyond anything he'd expected when he started live tweeting the incident. His Goldman Sachs colleagues were retweeting his updates to their own networks, amplifying the story into financial and business circles where Atlantic Airways stock would start getting hammered within hours. Kevin's most recent tweet read, "Update, rich white guy just offered black woman $800 to give up her paid seat." She tore up his money. This is the most badass thing I've ever seen. Flight crew still trying to remove her. Atlantic Air. This is your reputation dying in real time. Hashtag Flight 847. The tweet had been retweeted 50,000 times in 15 minutes. Atlantic Airways' social media team was already getting flooded with angry messages, but they had no idea what was happening at Gate D12. The first time they'd hear about the incident would be when their stock price started dropping in overnight trading. Victoria Hoffman's Instagram livestream had become an unintentional masterpiece of self-destruction. She'd started filming to document what she thought would be an entertaining removal of an obvious gate crasher, but instead she'd created a permanent record of her own racism and privilege. Her followers were abandoning her in real time as the comments section filled with people calling out her discriminatory language. "This is not the content I followed you for," wrote one user. "Unsubscribing from this racist garbage. Imagine being so entitled you think someone else should give up their paid seat for you," commented another. "The privilege is unreal. Victoria Hoffman is trending for all the wrong reasons," observed a third. "This is career suicide in 4K, but Victoria was so caught up in her own narrative of victimhood that she couldn't see how badly she was coming across to viewers. She kept doubling down, making increasingly inflammatory statements about certain people and diversity hires that would haunt her digital footprint forever." The viral explosion wasn't limited to passengers on the plane. Airport workers, gate agents, and other travelers had started filming the commotion through the windows of Gate D12. Multiple angles of the confrontation were being uploaded simultaneously, creating a comprehensive documentation of every discriminatory statement and biased decision. A gate agent from a competing airline posted a video to her own Instagram with the caption, "This is what discrimination in aviation looks like. Young black woman with paid first-class ticket being harassed by crew and entitled passengers. This needs to stop. Hashtag Flight 847. Hashtag Aviation." While black. The hashtag Flight 847 was now trending #1 on Twitter ahead of major news events and celebrity scandals. Hashtag Atlantic Airways was trending #3 with almost exclusively negative sentiment. Hashtag Travel. While black was climbing the charts as people shared their own stories of discrimination in airports and on aircraft, news outlets were starting to pick up the story. A producer at CNN had seen Kevin Park's thread and was already dispatching a camera crew to Miami International Airport. The local NBC affiliate had sent a reporter to the scene. TMZ was offering money for exclusive footage of the confrontation. But the most important viewer wasn't posting on social media or sending news crews. Director Sarah Martinez was monitoring the viral explosion from her government vehicle as she raced toward the airport, using the social media coverage to understand exactly what her investigation team would find when they arrived. Martinez's phone was buzzing with calls from superiors who'd seen the trending hashtags and wanted to understand why an FAA regional administrator was personally responding to a passenger dispute. But Martinez knew this wasn't just about one incident on one flight. This was about a pattern of discrimination that the airline industry had been ignoring for decades. Inside the aircraft, Captain David Mitchell was conducting his pre-flight checks when his phone started buzzing with notifications. His daughter had sent him a text, "Dad, is this your flight? This is all over TikTok." Mitchell opened the video and watched in horror as his flight attendant made increasingly discriminatory statements while passengers documented everything. He could see his airline's reputation disintegrating in real time, and he knew that in a few minutes Rebecca would be asking him to support her decision to remove a passenger who appeared to have done nothing wrong except exist while black in first class. Mitchell faced a choice that would define the rest of his career. He could support his crew and risk being part of a viral discrimination scandal, or he could overrule Rebecca and potentially face union complaints about undermining flight attendant authority. He chose poorly. James Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant who'd tried to provide factual information about Zara's booking, was watching the social media explosion with growing alarm. He could see his own face in some of the videos, standing silently while discrimination played out in front of him. The comments were brutal. That Hispanic flight attendant knows what's happening is wrong, but he's too scared to speak up. Silence is complicity. He's just as bad as the racist lead attendant. Stand up for what's right, or you're part of the problem. James realized that his career in aviation was probably over, regardless of what he did next. But at least he could try to end his involvement with some dignity intact. Other passengers were documenting their own perspectives on the incident. The man in seat 4B had been recording audio on his phone, capturing every discriminatory statement with crystal clarity. A woman in row 5 was live tweeting her observations as a frequent business traveler who'd seen similar incidents before. "This is not an isolated incident," she wrote. "I've watched airlines remove black passengers for attitude problems while allowing white passengers to scream at crew members. The bias is obvious and constant. The collective documentation was creating an irrefutable record of evidence that would make any airline defense impossible. There were multiple camera angles, dozens of witnesses, and a clear timeline showing how the situation had escalated from a simple boarding pass check to open discrimination and attempted bribery." Back in the jet bridge, Zara was watching the social media explosion with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd wanted to document discrimination, but she'd hoped the crew would make better choices once the evidence became clear. Instead, they doubled down on their bias, creating a viral disaster that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Marcus and Victoria Hoffman were still oblivious to the digital destruction they'd unleashed. Marcus was checking emails on his phone, unaware that his pharmaceutical company's board of directors was watching videos of him offering bribes and making racist statements. Victoria was still live streaming, not realizing that her follower count was dropping by thousands every minute as people shared clips of her most discriminatory comments. The irony was that both Hoffmans were prolific social media users who understood the power of viral content. They just never imagined they'd become the villains in someone else's story. Rebecca Torres was equally unaware of the digital wildfire she'd started. She was focused on getting Captain Mitchell to support her decision to remove Zara, not realizing that videos of her bias were being shared by millions of people around the world. Her own extended family in Miami was starting to recognize her in the viral videos, and the phone calls were beginning. As Rebecca entered the cockpit to speak with Captain Mitchell, she had no idea that her career in aviation was already over. The social media documentation had created a permanent record of her discrimination that would make her unemployable in any customer-facing role for any airline in the world. The viral explosion was also reaching the highest levels of Atlantic Airways corporate leadership. The CEO was being briefed on the trending hashtags while the head of public relations was trying to craft a response to something they didn't fully understand yet. Stock analysts were calling to ask about the potential financial impact of a discrimination scandal at a time when the airline industry was already facing intense scrutiny over passenger treatment. But none of the corporate executives, social media users, or news outlets following the story understood the most important fact: Zara Blackwood wasn't just a victim of discrimination. She was the person with the power to shut down the entire airline if she chose to use it. That revelation was less than 10 minutes away, and when it came, it would turn the viral story from a simple discrimination incident into a complete corporate catastrophe that would reshape the aviation industry forever. The social media documentation had served its purpose. The evidence was permanent, the witnesses were multiple, and the accountability was inevitable. Now it was time for justice. Captain David Mitchell emerged from the cockpit expecting to deal with a routine passenger removal that would delay his departure by perhaps 15 minutes. He'd handled dozens of these situations over his 20-year career, and they usually followed a predictable pattern: de-escalate the immediate conflict, support the crew's authority, and get everyone seated so they could make up time once airborne. What Mitchell didn't expect was to find himself walking into the middle of a viral discrimination scandal that was being documented by multiple cameras and broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world. He also didn't expect that the passenger Rebecca wanted removed would turn out to be the person who could end his career with a single phone call. Captain Mitchell. Rebecca said, meeting him at the cockpit door with obvious relief. "Thank you for coming forward. We have a passenger who's refusing to follow crew instructions and causing a disruption. She's claiming ownership of a seat that belongs to our elite members, and she's been aggressive toward other passengers." Mitchell looked past Rebecca toward the jet bridge, where he could see Zara standing calmly beside two airport security officers, while Marcus and Victoria Hoffman gestured animatedly at their phones. Other passengers were openly filming, and the boarding process had completely stopped. The situation was clearly more complex than Rebecca's summary suggested. What exactly happened here, Mitchell asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided to support his crew regardless of the answer. The passenger in question boarded with what appears to be a legitimate first-class ticket, Rebecca explained, but she's in seats that our Platinum Elite members always use. When I asked her to move to accommodate our valued customers, she became hostile and uncooperative. She even destroyed federal currency when Mr. Hoffman tried to compensate her for the inconvenience. Mitchell nodded, making the same assumptions that had doomed Rebecca's career. He saw a young black woman in casual clothes being supported by airport security while well-dressed elite members stood nearby looking frustrated. The math seemed simple enough. Ma'am Mitchell addressed Zara with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to having his decisions accepted without question. "I'm Captain Mitchell. I understand there's been some confusion about seating assignments." Zara looked at him steadily. "There's no confusion, Captain. I'm in seat 1A, which is printed on my boarding pass. Mr. Hoffman is in seat 1C, which is printed on his boarding pass. The only confusion is why your crew thinks his preference matters more than my reservation." Mitchell glanced at the boarding passes, but his decision was already made. In his experience, passengers who could afford first-class tickets regularly usually deserved accommodation, while passengers who looked like college students usually deserved skepticism. "Miss, I appreciate that you have a boarding pass for seat 1A," Mitchell said in the condescending tone airline employees often used with younger passengers. "But Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman are valued elite members who've been flying this route for years. I'm sure we can find you a comparable seat that meets your needs without disrupting our established passenger relationships." The statement was so obviously contrary to basic airline policies and federal regulations that several passengers gasped audibly. Amanda Wright, still recording everything, zoomed in on Mitchell's face as he essentially admitted that elite status trumped confirmed reservations. Zara felt a familiar mixture of exhaustion and determination. She'd hoped that the captain would show better judgment than his crew, but instead he was doubling down on the same discriminatory assumptions that had started this entire confrontation. Captain Mitchell Zara said, her voice calm, but carrying an edge that made him look at her more carefully. "I strongly recommend that you check the ownership records of this aircraft before you make a decision you cannot undo." Mitchell scoffed. "The ownership records Atlantic Airways owns this aircraft and I'm the captain. I have final authority over passenger seating and aircraft security." "Atlantic Airways leases this aircraft," Zara corrected him. "From Blackwood Aviation Leasing. This is tail number N847AAA Boeing 777-300ER, manufactured in 2019. Would you like me to recite the lease agreement terms, or would you prefer to look them up yourself?" Something in her voice made Mitchell pause. The level of specific detail wasn't what he'd expect from a college student making empty threats. But he'd committed to supporting his crew, and backing down now would undermine his authority in front of elite passengers. "Ma'am, I don't have time for your fantasies about aircraft ownership," Mitchell said dismissively. "You have two choices. Accept alternative seating or leave the aircraft. If you choose to leave voluntarily, there won't be any notation on your record." If you force us to remove you, you'll be flagged in the system as a disruptive passenger." Zara took out her phone and checked her messages. Director Martinez was 3 minutes away from the gate. Agent Torres from the local FAA field office was already in the terminal. The legal team was standing by to execute whatever response Zara deemed appropriate. "Captain, I'm going to ask you one more time to check the aircraft ownership manifest before you proceed," Zara said. "Because in approximately 90 seconds, you're going to meet some federal investigators who are very interested in how this situation has been handled." Before Mitchell could respond, James Rodriguez approached from the galley area. The junior flight attendant looked pale and nervous, but he was carrying the passenger manifest and service records that might prevent a complete disaster. Captain James said quietly, "I think you need to see this before we proceed." Mitchell took the papers irritably. "What is it, Rodriguez?" "The passenger in 1A paid full fare for her ticket 3 weeks in advance," James explained. $4,847. Cash payment, no points, no upgrades, no employee benefits. She's not trying to sneak into first class, sir. She belongs there. The information should have ended the confrontation immediately. But Mitchell was too invested in his initial decision to change course, and he was more concerned about maintaining face in front of elite passengers than following airline policies. Rodriguez, seating assignments are at crew discretion when safety or security issues arise. Mitchell said, though no such issues had been identified. "We accommodate our valued customers whenever possible." But Sir James pressed, "There's no safety or security issue here, and there's something else you should know." James leaned closer and whispered urgently, "Captain, this is all over social media. There are videos everywhere. We're trending on Twitter. The company is going to want explanations." Mitchell pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed calls from Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters. His text messages were filled with urgent requests for information about the incident on Flight 847. His daughter had sent him links to viral TikTok videos showing his crew making discriminatory statements. For the first time since the confrontation began, Mitchell realized that this wasn't a routine passenger dispute that would be forgotten once they reached cruising altitude. This was a viral incident that could destroy careers, ruin reputations, and cost the airline millions in negative publicity. But it was too late for better decisions. As Mitchell stood in the jet bridge doorway, trying to process the magnitude of the disaster he was walking into, the sound of squeaking wheels announced the arrival of Director Sarah Martinez and her team of federal investigators. Martinez moved through the terminal with the focused intensity of someone who'd been waiting years for exactly this kind of evidence. As the FAA regional administrator for the Southeast, she'd been tracking patterns of discrimination across multiple airlines, but she'd never had such clear documentation of bias in action. Martinez was accompanied by Agent Michael Torres from the local field office, Agent Lisa Park from DOT's Civil Rights Division, and 2 federal marshals whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the boarding area. When federal law enforcement arrives at an airport gate, everyone pays attention. "Excuse me," Martinez said, approaching the group clustered around Gate D12. "I'm Director Sarah Martinez, FAA Regional Administrator. We're conducting an immediate investigation into allegations of passenger discrimination and violation of federal aviation regulations." The announcement hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Rebecca Torres went pale. Captain Mitchell felt his stomach drop. Marcus and Victoria Hoffman stopped arguing and turned to stare at the federal agents. Only Zara remained calm because she'd been expecting this moment since she'd sent her first text message 30 minutes earlier. Director Martinez, Zara said, stepping forward. "Thank you for responding so quickly." Martinez looked at Zara with the mixture of professional concern and personal anger that comes from watching discrimination play out in real time through social media coverage. Ms. Blackwood Martinez said, using Zara's last name for the first time since the confrontation began. "We've been monitoring the social media coverage of this incident. Agent Torres will need to take statements from everyone involved." The use of Zara's last name sent a shockwave through the group. Marcus Hoffman's pharmaceutical company had business relationships with several defense contractors, and the name Blackwood was familiar from industry publications and government contract announcements. Victoria stopped live streaming and started frantically Googling Zara Blackwood on her phone. The results made her face go white. Forbes 30 under 30 defense contractor billionaire owner of multiple aviation leasing companies. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered, showing the search results to Marcus. She's actually... Agent Torres stepped forward and addressed Captain Mitchell directly. "Captain, we need to discuss the federal regulations regarding passenger removal and discrimination in aviation settings. Were you planning to remove this passenger from the aircraft?" Mitchell looked around desperately, realizing that every answer he could give would incriminate either himself or his crew. There was a seating dispute. We were trying to accommodate our elite members by removing a passenger with a confirmed reservation so that another passenger could sit in a seat he didn't book. Agent Torres asked, making notes on his tablet. "Can you explain the safety or security justification for that decision?" The question hung in the air unanswered because there was no safety or security justification. There never had been. The entire incident was based on assumptions about who belonged in first class and who didn't. Director Martinez turned to Rebecca Torres. "Flight Attendant Torres, you initiated the passenger removal request. Can you walk me through your decision-making process?" Rebecca looked like she was going to be sick. The passenger... She was wearing what Martinez pressed. "And how does passenger clothing relate to Federal Aviation safety regulations?" Rebecca couldn't answer because the honest answer would be an admission of racial profiling that would end her career immediately. Agent Park from the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division stepped forward with a thick folder of documents. "Ms. Blackwood, Agent Park, said we've reviewed the aircraft ownership records. Can you confirm that Blackwood Aviation Leasing holds the primary lease agreement for tail number N847AA? Yes." Zara replied simply, along with 43 other aircraft in Atlantic Airways' international fleet. The revelation hit Captain Mitchell like a physical blow. The passenger he'd been planning to remove wasn't just any first-class traveler. She was the owner of nearly half his airline's fleet, including the specific aircraft he was standing on. Marcus Hoffman felt the world tilt around him. The young woman he'd offered $800 to move to economy class was worth more than his entire pharmaceutical fortune. The diversity hire he'd been condescending to owned the plane he'd been demanding special treatment on. Victoria realized that her Instagram live stream had captured her making racist comments about a billionaire defense contractor who was probably friends with half the Pentagon. Her social media career wasn't just over, it was radioactive. But the federal investigators weren't finished. Agent Torres pulled out an official-looking document and began reading from it. "Atlantic Airways Flight 847 is now under a federal ground stop order," Torres announced. "No passenger movements, no crew changes, no aircraft movement until this investigation is completed. Captain Mitchell, your pilot certificate is under immediate review." Mitchell felt 20 years of aviation career disappearing in real time. Agent Torres: "I was just trying to support my crew by violating federal regulations regarding passenger discrimination," Martinez interjected. "Captain, we have multiple video recordings of crew members making statements that clearly violate DOT civil rights policies. You're not supporting your crew, you're enabling discrimination." Rebecca Torres realized that her career in aviation was over. Not just her job with Atlantic Airways, but her ability to work for any airline anywhere. The viral videos would follow her forever, making her unemployable in any customer service role. "I didn't mean..." Rebecca started to say, but Martinez cut her off. "Flight Attendant Torres, you are suspended from duty immediately pending a full investigation. Agent Park will escort you from the aircraft. The destruction of everyone who'd participated in discriminating against Zara was swift and comprehensive. But the federal investigators weren't just there to punish individuals. They were there to document evidence for a broader case against structural discrimination in the airline industry. Ms. Blackwood Martinez said, "We'd like to discuss the broader patterns you've observed in aviation passenger treatment. This incident appears to be part of a larger issue that requires federal intervention." Zara nodded. She'd documented 3 similar incidents over the past 6 months, creating a pattern that proved bias wasn't just individual prejudice, but institutional failure to protect passenger rights. As federal agents continued taking statements and gathering evidence, Marcus and Victoria Hoffman stood in the jet bridge, realizing that their privileged world was collapsing around them. Marcus's pharmaceutical company stock would crater when videos of him offering bribes went viral. Victoria's endorsement deals would evaporate when brands saw her making racist statements to millions of viewers. The Hoffmans had walked onto Flight 847 thinking they were entitled to special treatment because of their wealth and status. They were about to learn that in the modern era of viral accountability, privilege couldn't protect them from the consequences of their own recorded words and actions. As airport police arrived to escort the Hoffmans off the aircraft, Zara remained in the jet bridge watching justice unfold with quiet satisfaction. She hadn't wanted to destroy anyone's career or life. She'd just wanted to fly to London in the seat she'd paid for. But sometimes justice requires consequences, and sometimes those consequences are swift, public, and permanent. The plane that was supposed to depart at 11:45 p.m. would remain grounded until morning, but the changes that started that night would reshape the airline industry for years to come. Within 2 hours of Director Martinez's arrival at Gate D12, the consequences of Flight 847's discrimination incident began cascading through multiple industries with the unstoppable force of a controlled demolition. The viral videos had reached critical mass, turning a localized airport confrontation into a global conversation about privilege power and the price of racist assumptions. Marcus Hoffman's destruction began at 1:47 a.m. when a board member of Hoffman Pharmaceuticals called an emergency virtual meeting. The board had been monitoring social media throughout the night, watching in horror as videos of their CEO offering bribes and making racist statements accumulated millions of views. The pharmaceutical industry was already under intense scrutiny for pricing practices and corporate ethics, and Marcus's behavior had made their company radioactive overnight. Marcus, the board chairman, said during the emergency Zoom call, "We've reviewed the viral footage from Flight 847. The company cannot survive association with your statements and actions. The board has voted unanimously to terminate your employment effective immediately for cause with forfeiture of all severance and equity compensation." Marcus stared at his laptop screen from his Miami hotel room, still not fully comprehending how quickly his world had collapsed. 12 hours earlier, he'd been a respected pharmaceutical executive. Now he was unemployable in any industry that valued public reputation. "You can't fire me," Marcus protested weakly. "I built this company. I own 40% of the stock." "We're not firing you," the chairman corrected. "We're removing you as CEO and from all management positions due to conduct detrimental to the company. The ethics clause in your contract specifically covers public behavior that damages corporate reputation. Your stock ownership remains, but your active role ends immediately." The call ended with Marcus staring at a blank screen, realizing that his pharmaceutical empire was crumbling because he'd been unable to accept that a black woman in a hoodie could afford first-class seats. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he was too proud to acknowledge it. Victoria Hoffman's fall was even more spectacular and public. Her Instagram live stream had captured her most discriminatory statements, and social media detectives had spent the night compiling video evidence of her racist behavior. By morning, every brand that had ever worked with her was frantically distancing themselves from the association. Her talent agent called at 2:15 a.m. "Victoria, I'm sorry, but we can't represent you anymore." Every client we've pitched your name to has specifically requested no association with you. You're not just unemployable in influencer marketing, you're toxic to any brand that values diversity and inclusion. Victoria's follower count, which had peaked at 147,000, was hemorrhaging thousands of users every hour. But worse than losing followers, she was gaining infamy. Clips of her most racist statements were being shared by major news outlets, civil rights organizations, and celebrity activists who had millions of followers each. "This is what privilege looks like," actress Viola Davis tweeted, sharing a video compilation of Victoria's comments. "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." The tweet was retweeted 890,000 times in 6 hours. Victoria Hoffman had become a global symbol of entitled racism, and there was no coming back from that kind of viral notoriety. Rebecca Torres faced different but equally devastating consequences. Her suspension from Atlantic Airways was just the beginning of a career-ending cascade that would follow her for decades. The FAA had flagged her certification for immediate review, which meant no airline anywhere could legally employ her as a flight attendant. But the professional consequences were nothing compared to the personal destruction. Rebecca's extended family in Miami had seen the viral videos, and the Latino community was particularly harsh in their condemnation of her discriminatory behavior. Social media posts in Spanish criticized her for betraying her own people and acting like the oppressor. Rebecca's apartment complex received so many complaint calls that they asked her to leave when her lease expired. Her local grocery store had employees who recognized her from viral videos and made shopping uncomfortable. She'd become locally famous for all the wrong reasons. The airline industry's response was swift and comprehensive. Atlantic Airways' CEO held an emergency board meeting at 3 a.m. to address the crisis. The company's stock had dropped 18% in overnight trading as investors realized the potential liability from discriminating against a major lessor who could cancel contracts worth billions. "We need to contain this before it spreads to our other routes and partnerships," the CEO said during the emergency call. "The passenger they discriminated against could literally ground our entire international fleet if she chooses to exercise her contract rights." Atlantic Airways' head of public relations was already drafting multiple apology statements, but she knew that no corporate language could undo the damage from viral video evidence. When discrimination is documented from multiple angles and broadcast to millions of viewers, traditional public relations strategies become useless. The airline's response strategy focused on 3 priorities: apologize profusely to Zara Blackwood, implement new anti-discrimination training immediately, and hope she didn't exercise her contract rights to cancel their fleet leases. Captain David Mitchell's 20-year aviation career ended officially at 4:22 a.m. when he received a certified email from Atlantic Airways' Flight Operations Department. The message was brief. "Captain Mitchell, your employment with Atlantic Airways is terminated immediately for violation of federal civil rights policies and failure to follow proper passenger conflict resolution procedures." But losing his job was just the beginning of Mitchell's problems. The FAA was conducting a formal review of his pilot's license, which could result in permanent grounding. The pilots' union couldn't defend him because viral video evidence clearly showed him making discriminatory decisions that violated federal regulations. Mitchell's wife filed for divorce the next morning after watching news coverage of the incident. "I can't be married to someone the whole world knows as a racist," she told him during their final conversation. "Our children are being bullied at school because of your viral videos." The destruction of everyone who'd participated in discriminating against Zara was thorough and swift, but the broader consequences extended far beyond individual careers. The Department of Transportation announced a comprehensive investigation into discrimination practices across the airline industry. Director Martinez's team would audit passenger removal records, crew training programs, and corporate policies to identify patterns of bias that required federal intervention. Congressional representatives who'd seen the viral videos were calling for hearings on aviation discrimination. Senator Elizabeth Warren tweeted, "When a billionaire defense contractor can be dragged off her own plane because of the color of her skin, we have a structure that prioritizes profits over basic human dignity. This demands congressional action." The tweet was shared 1.2 million times, ensuring that Flight 847 would become a case study in legislative hearings for years to come. But the most significant consequence was happening in corporate boardrooms across the aviation industry. Airlines realized that social media documentation had changed the risk calculation for discriminatory behavior. Viral accountability moved faster than traditional legal processes, and the financial damage could be immediate and catastrophic. Every major airline announced new discrimination training programs within 48 hours of the Flight 847 incident. Not because they'd suddenly developed ethical consciousness, but because they understood that viral videos could destroy stock prices overnight. Zara Blackwood watched the destruction of everyone who'd discriminated against her with mixed emotions. She hadn't wanted to ruin anyone's life, but she understood that accountability required consequences. Her goal had always been structural change, not personal revenge. The incident had achieved something that decades of civil rights litigation hadn't: immediate industry-wide changes in discrimination policies. Airlines were now afraid of viral accountability in ways they'd never been afraid of traditional lawsuits. 3 days after the incident, Zara received a personal call from Atlantic Airways' CEO, Ms. Blackwood. The CEO said, his voice carefully controlled, "I want to personally apologize for the unconscionable treatment you received on Flight 847. The behavior you experienced does not represent our company values or policies." "It represented your company culture," Zara replied. "Policies are words on paper. Culture is what happens when leadership isn't watching." "You're absolutely right," the CEO admitted. "We need to do better, and we will do better. I'm calling to assure you that the individuals responsible have faced appropriate consequences, and we're implementing comprehensive changes to prevent similar incidents." Zara listened to the carefully crafted apology, knowing it was motivated more by fear of contract cancellations than genuine ethical awakening. But fear-based change was still change, and change was what she'd been working toward. "I appreciate your call," Zara said, "but I'll be measuring your commitment by results, not promises." The conversation ended with both parties understanding exactly where they stood. Atlantic Airways would keep their fleet leases as long as they demonstrated real change in passenger treatment. If they reverted to discriminatory practices, Zara had the power to shut down their international operations overnight. The Hoffman family's destruction was particularly complete and public. Marcus's pharmaceutical company was sold to a competitor within 2 months, partly because his racist viral videos had made the company unmarketable to minority communities who comprised a significant portion of their customer base. Victoria's attempt to rebuild her social media presence failed spectacularly when every post was flooded with comments referencing her Flight 847 behavior. She eventually deleted all her accounts and moved to a different state, working under her maiden name to escape the viral notoriety. The most satisfying consequence for Zara was watching James Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant who'd tried to speak up for facts and fairness, get promoted to training supervisor for Atlantic Airways' new anti-discrimination program. His courage in contradicting his supervisor had saved his career and positioned him to help prevent future incidents. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything in the short term, but saves everything in the long term, Zara told James during a follow-up call. "You chose correctly when it mattered most." The Flight 847 incident had cost several people their careers, their reputations, and their financial security, but it had also forced an entire industry to confront discriminatory practices that had been ignored for decades. As Zara finally boarded her rescheduled flight to London the next evening, flying in seat 1A on the same aircraft where she'd been discriminated against 12 hours earlier, she reflected on the price of justice and the power of viral accountability. Sometimes change requires destruction. Sometimes accountability demands consequences. And sometimes a young woman in a hoodie has to destroy an entire structure before it can be rebuilt properly. The plane took off on schedule, carrying Zara toward her meeting with the UK Ministry of Defence. But the changes that started in that jet bridge would reshape aviation for generations to come. Justice had been swift, comprehensive, and permanent, and it had been broadcast live to the entire world. 6 months after the Flight 847 incident, Zara Blackwood walked through Miami International Airport wearing the same Columbia University hoodie and carrying the same canvas messenger bag that had caused so much controversy. But this time, her arrival at Gate D12 was met with respectful smiles from airline staff who'd been trained on a new protocol that would forever change how passengers were treated in American aviation. The changes that had emerged from 30 minutes of viral discrimination were comprehensive and permanent. The Blackwood Protocol, as it had become known in industry circles, required every airline to implement bias training independent review processes and zero-tolerance policies for discrimination. More importantly, it had shifted the cultural understanding of who belonged in premium airline services. Zara was returning to London for her quarterly meeting with the UK Ministry of Defence, but this trip had a different purpose. Tonight she would be the keynote speaker at the International Aviation Industry Conference, where airline executives from around the world would gather to discuss the new standards of passenger treatment that had emerged from their collective failure. As she approached the same gate where her ordeal had begun, Zara was greeted by Jennifer Martinez, Atlantic Airways' new Director of Passenger Experience. Jennifer was a young Latina who'd been promoted specifically to implement the changes that had emerged from the Flight 847 investigation. "Ms. Blackwood," Jennifer said, extending her hand warmly. "Welcome aboard. Your seat 1A is ready, and I wanted to personally ensure that your travel experience meets our new standards." The difference was immediately apparent. Instead of questioning Zara's presence or making assumptions based on her appearance, the crew treated her with the same respect they'd show any passenger regardless of age, race, or clothing choices. But the real change was visible in the other passengers. The first-class cabin was more diverse than Zara had ever seen it, filled with young professionals, minority business travelers, and families who looked like they belonged everywhere they'd paid to be. The Flight 847 incident had emboldened people to claim spaces they'd previously avoided, and airlines had learned to see revenue potential in passengers they'd once dismissed. As Zara settled into seat 1A, she noticed a young black girl, perhaps 12 years old, boarding with her grandmother and taking their seats in row 2. The girl was wearing a NASA t-shirt and carrying an aerospace engineering textbook that looked too advanced for her age. During the flight, the girl approached Zara's seat with a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Excuse me," the girl said quietly. "Are you the lady from the video? The one who changed everything?" Zara looked up from her laptop, remembering herself at that age, full of dreams about space exploration and engineering innovations that adults often dismissed as unrealistic for girls who looked like her. "I'm Zara," she replied simply. "What's your name?" "I'm Maya," the girl said, clutching her textbook. "I want to build spacecraft when I grow up. My grandmother says I can do anything, but some people at school say girls like me don't become engineers." Zara gestured to the empty seat beside her. "Maya, can I tell you something? The people who say you can't do something are usually the same people who've never done anything important themselves. Don't let their limitations become your boundaries." Maya sat down, her eyes wide with attention. "Did you really own this plane when they tried to kick you off?" "I own the lease on this aircraft," Zara confirmed. "But more importantly, I belonged here because I paid for my seat just like you paid for yours. Never let anyone convince you that you don't belong somewhere you've earned the right to be. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, covering everything from orbital mechanics to the challenges of being young female and ambitious in fields dominated by older white men. Maya absorbed every word like she was memorizing a blueprint for her own future. As Maya returned to her seat, her grandmother approached Zara with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the older woman said quietly. "Maya has watched your video 100 times. You showed her that standing up for yourself isn't just possible, it's necessary. That girl is going to change the world, partly because you showed her she has the right to exist in it." The exchange crystallized something Zara had been thinking about for months. The Flight 847 incident had achieved more than just policy changes or individual accountability. It had shifted cultural expectations about who deserved respect and dignity in public spaces. When the plane landed at Heathrow, Zara was met by her usual British liaison, but also by a documentary crew from the BBC who were following her for a film about the transformation of the airline industry. The Flight 847 incident had become a case study taught in business schools, law schools, and civil rights programs around the world. Ms. Blackwood, the documentary director, asked as they walked through the terminal, "What do you hope people learn from what happened that night?" Zara paused, considering her response carefully. "I hope they learn that dignity isn't negotiable, that respect isn't earned through designer clothes or platinum cards, and that sometimes the person you're trying to diminish owns the building you're standing in." The documentary would air 3 months later, featuring interviews with Maya and her grandmother, James Rodriguez, in his new role training airline personnel and dozens of passengers who'd been inspired by Zara's example to stand up for their own rights. But the most powerful moment in the film came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Torres, speaking from her small apartment in Honduras, where she now worked as a customer service representative for a call center. "I lost everything because I made assumptions based on how someone looked," Rebecca said to the camera, her voice heavy with regret. "I judged a passenger by her clothes instead of her character, and I paid the price for that judgment. I hope my mistake serves as a warning to others. Treat every person with dignity, because you never know who you're talking to, and more importantly, every person deserves respect regardless of who they are." The clip would become one of the most shared portions of the documentary, turning Rebecca from villain to cautionary example, to ultimately a voice for change. Marcus Hoffman had refused to participate in the documentary, but his story served as a different kind of lesson. His pharmaceutical fortune was gone, his marriage was over, and his reputation was permanently damaged. He'd become a case study in how viral accountability could destroy decades of accumulated power in a matter of hours. Victoria Hoffman had attempted to rebuild her life under her maiden name, working as a retail manager in a small town where no one recognized her. But the internet never forgets, and her Flight 847 behavior would follow her forever, serving as a permanent reminder of the costs of public racism in the social media age. The conference where Zara spoke that evening was attended by 4,000 airline industry professionals from around the world. Her speech, titled "The True Cost of Discrimination," was streamed live to aviation schools and corporate training programs globally. "6 months ago, I was removed from my own aircraft because the crew couldn't believe that someone who looked like me belonged in first-class." Zara began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "That incident cost several people their careers, damaged a major airline's reputation, and sparked changes throughout your industry." She paused, looking out at an audience that included many of the executives who'd implemented the policy changes that emerged from her experience. "But the most important change isn't in your training manuals or company policies. It's in your understanding that every passenger who boards your aircraft is a human being deserving of dignity and respect, not because of their net worth or their frequent flyer status, but because respect is the minimum standard of human interaction." The audience was silent, absorbed in her message. The young woman in the hoodie sitting in first class might be a college student flying on her parents' money, or she might be a defense contractor worth billions. But her value as a human being doesn't change based on which one she turns out to be. Treat everyone with dignity, and you'll never have to worry about going viral for the wrong reasons. The speech received a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. But more importantly, it reinforced the cultural shift that had begun in a jet bridge 6 months earlier. As Zara left the conference that night, she received a text message from Maya, the young girl she'd met on the flight. "Ms. Blackwood, I got accepted to space camp. My grandmother says it's because I learned to believe I belong anywhere I dream of going. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." The message made Zara smile as she realized that the most important consequence of the Flight 847 incident wasn't the policy changes or corporate accountability. It was the inspiration it provided to young people who'd learned that standing up for yourself wasn't just possible, it was necessary. 1 year later, Atlantic Airways would report its highest customer satisfaction scores in company history, driven largely by improved treatment of all passengers regardless of demographics. Other airlines would follow suit, creating an industry-wide transformation that began with 30 minutes of viral discrimination. Zara kept flying commercial airlines regularly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to monitor the changes and ensure they remained permanent. Every flight was a test of whether the industry had truly learned its lesson or was simply waiting for public attention to fade. The answer was encouraging. Flight crews treated all passengers with respect. Seating disputes were resolved fairly, and the assumption that wealth determined worth had largely disappeared from customer service interactions. The Flight 847 incident had proven that viral accountability could achieve in hours what decades of litigation had failed to accomplish. And it had shown that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or demands for apologies. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply refusing to accept less than the dignity you deserve. As Zara boarded flights around the world wearing her favorite hoodie and carrying her canvas bag, she served as a living reminder that respect isn't negotiable and that dignity belongs to everyone who has the courage to claim it. The changes were permanent, the lessons were learned, and the industry would never be the same. And every time a young person of color walked confidently onto an aircraft and took their seat without question, they were standing on ground that had been cleared by a 22-year-old who'd refused to give up the seat she'd paid for. Justice had been served, change had been achieved, and dignity had been restored. The revolution had been quiet, but it had been complete. And it all started with a simple truth. This seat is mine, and I'm not moving. Today, Zara Blackwood's story is taught in business schools as a case study in crisis management and viral accountability. The Flight 847 incident fundamentally changed how airlines approach passenger treatment, creating industry-wide standards that prioritize dignity over demographics. Maya, the young girl who met Zara on that flight, was accepted to MIT's aerospace engineering program 2 years later. In her application essay, she wrote, "I learned that belonging isn't something you ask permission for. It's something you claim through courage, maintain through character, and defend through dignity." The lesson of Flight 847 extends far beyond aviation. In an era where every interaction can be documented and shared globally, the true cost of discrimination isn't just moral, it's practical, immediate, and permanent. When people show you who they are through their treatment of others, believe them. And when they face consequences for that treatment, remember that accountability isn't cruel. It's necessary for progress. Sometimes the person you underestimate isn't just in the wrong seat. Sometimes they own the whole plane, and sometimes that's exactly the lesson the world needs to learn. If this story moved you, please smash that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear this message. Share this video with someone who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere they've earned the right to be. And subscribe to our channel because we bring you stories of justice, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. Have you ever been judged by your appearance while traveling? Drop your story in the comments below. We read every single one, and your experience might inspire someone else to find their own courage. Remember, dignity isn't negotiable. Respect isn't optional. And sometimes the quiet person in the hoodie is the one with the power to change everything. Until next time, stay strong, stay dignified, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong where you've earned the right to be.